I've been living in Idaho for just over 4 years now. I moved from the Dallas/Fort Worth area in 2015 with my parents. I'm 24 now. Moved out of my parents' house into my own apartment with my beautiful fiance, and I couldn't be happier. Since I was already out of high school, and I keep to myself more than most, my group of friends is rather small. I'm fairly outgoing, and I've never had a lot of difficulty making friends. Still, the only place I ever really have a chance to talk to people is at work. I work as a correctional officer, a prison guard in simple terms. Being surrounded by inmates isn't exactly how I would prefer to spend my day, but it pays a good deal more than most other jobs at entry level. I've worked there for about 3 years now, and nobody that I could call my friend also works there. It's not the best setting to make new friends in, but it works. There are three people that I hang out with most of the time. Bowers, Reed, and Taylor are the people closest to me. Sure, I hang out with plenty of others that work there, but more in a everyone was coming, so I came too kind of way. Bowers, Reed, and Taylor are their last names. Working where we do, that's how you know each other. So from here on out, that's how I'll identify them. I spend most time with Taylor. He and I usually like to go ride our bikes around town, grab a bite to eat, maybe drive around and talk. Nothing too glamorous. I see Reed most any day at work, but he has quite a busy life. With his wife and their new baby, his schedule is mostly dedicated to being a family man now, which is fair. I still see him whenever he has the opportunity. Bowers, on the other hand, is who I have most in common with. I'm a big horror fan. I love scary movies, scary stories, scary places, anything to chill your bones and make your skin crawl. Bowers is much of the same. He's always talking about writing a screenplay for an amateur horror movie he wants to make. I always thought it was a good idea, so we'll sit at work and brainstorm together, trying to come up with a story we deem scary and unique. It's not exactly easy in our primary setting. Prison is a scary place, but for a different reason. A lot of the time, when we hang out with each other, we like to go adventuring to the more eerie places that Idaho has to offer. Given that there aren't too many places to go that will make the hair on your neck rise, we have to get a little creative. There are some mountain roads, a couple of abandoned properties, just your run-of-the-mill haunted places. These places serve more of an inspirational purpose than anything. It gets us into the proper on-edge mood to come up with scary elements to a story. When it comes to horror, Bowers also shares the majority of my views on what's properly scary. We both agree that jump scares are cheap. It doesn't take much to make somebody jump, and it generally doesn't matter what object, noise, or figure jumps out. It will still make you jump. For me to fully enjoy a horror movie, I like the feeling of being creeped out. Instead of loud noises, I prefer more a sense of, hey, did you guys hear that? Instead of a scary face jumping from off screen, I'd rather have something sitting in the background, waiting for my view to fall upon it. Bowers is exactly the same, so when it comes to individual preferences, they're almost identical. One day at work, Bowers comes up to me and mentions this place he saw on YouTube about. It was an abandoned factory. I have to admit, the factory sounded awesome. I had been to abandoned orphanages before, but sure, never a factory. So I asked him, just how abandoned is it? He explained, well, from what I understand, it was abandoned sometime in the 1970s. It was a factory for making concrete. But when they built a new one, they just left the old one to rot. It sounded pretty promising. Where is it? I asked. A city called Lime in Oregon, he said. I checked a map on my phone, and it showed that Lime was just across the border of Idaho to Oregon. Not a far drive at all, and the factory was sitting just off the side of the main freeway. The pictures I could find on Google just ensured that it would be a fantastic place to explore. My work week was coming to an end, so I texted Bowers and we set up a time for us both to go. My Friday was actually his Thursday, so I figured the best time to go would be on my Saturday after he got off of work. He worked until 10 p.m., So we would have the perfect mindset when exploring this abandoned pile of concrete up in the high desert. I showed up to his apartment around 11:30 p.m. once he had gotten home and changed clothes. He climbed into my Ford Ranger and we headed off into the night, stopping only for some essential supplies, cigarettes and a couple sodas. The drive was perfect. Traffic was almost non-existent going down the highway, and we had the proper soundtrack of some Pink Floyd to keep us company. I was following the GPS on my phone to the factory. Even though we knew it was the right side off of the highway, we presumed it would be too dark to spot. We hopped off the freeway and started down a partially lit road that turned to dirt after driving down it for just a short while. Since we were in no hurry, I left my truck in second gear and we just coasted along this gravelly, pothole riddled road. Eventually, it led to concrete again. We had taken an exit that led to the town of Huntington, just to take a bit longer. Let it build up in our minds a little more. After another 15 minutes or so of driving, my headlights washed over the old concrete factory in Lime, Oregon. The main part of the factory was on the right-hand side of the road, and there were some old drum silos on the left. We pulled off to the left and parked in the dirt. As soon as I turned my headlights off, we were bathed in darkness, with only the stale green glow from the time displayed on my truck's radio providing any sort of illumination. I could instantly feel the sense of uneasiness fill me up. I wasn't exactly regretting the decision to come all the way out here, but it was the fact that we were all the way out here that made me nervous. I checked my phone, and I had no reception. Bowers had no signal as well. I had 2 small flashlights that we could carry, and a full pack of cigarettes to calm my nerves. We also both were carrying our handguns, kind of a just-in-case measure. We got out of my truck and took a look around. As we stood there in the dirt, I looked up at the sky and noticed how brilliantly dark the surrounding area was. I could quite clearly see the Milky Way. Millions and millions of stars twinkled down at us, but instead of peace, I was feeling terror. Keep in mind, I did ask for this. This feeling that I'm experiencing is exactly why I love to be scared. My adrenaline was going a little haywire, so I lit a cigarette to relax myself a little bit. The dry, billowy smoke is just what I needed to calm down. Bowers followed suit and lit one for himself as well. The red glow from the cherry embers on the end of my Marlboro provided much more light than I had taken note of in the past, sending out a radiating orange light, almost to where it created a scarlet orb on the dirt around my shell toes. As we stood there in silence, we listened for sounds. There were no other cars around, except for the ones passing by on the highway every couple of minutes, but none parked near the factory. There was a slight breeze that wafted through the property, creating the illusion that something was moving objects around in the factory. There was a big hole in the ground, maybe 5 feet by 5 feet, that, when the breeze would hit it just right, would cause a whistle to emanate out into the warm, dry, summer air. I walked over to the hole to look inside. I grabbed my flashlight and stood about a foot away from the edge. I clicked the power button and shined the light down inside. At the bottom, maybe 9 or 10 feet, lay piles of rubble, rock, and wood. It was too far to jump down, so I aimed my focus elsewhere until such time that I could find another potential entrance. I looked back at Bowers, still standing in front of my truck, just staring off at the factory. I walked up next to him and said, "Hey, this is pretty cool, man. Definitely a good choice." All he uttered was a simple, "Uh-huh." I suggested we go explore the rest of the factory, which he agreed to. To get to the main collection of buildings, we had to walk up a slight hill. Once at the top, we both turned on our flashlights and aimed them around at whatever caught our focus. I was focusing more on the graffiti that was plastered all over the walls. Some of it was actually quite impressive. Not just the simple tags or names and dates, but actual murals. Some murals got so complex, they actually utilized an entire building. Mind you, some of the buildings are quite small, but they would base each one on what I think was supposed to be a Greek god. Each one had its own dedicated building as something of a tribute. I honestly couldn't tell you the significance, but it sure caught my eye. Bowers was focused elsewhere. His face didn't seem to show interest, but instead indifference. He would walk slowly from one window of a building to the next, turn to face it, shine his light in, and stare for a few seconds with a blank expression before moving on to the next one. It didn't quite make sense to me, as he usually loves this kind of stuff, but as of right now, he seems uninterested in anything. I walked over to join him at the two tallest smokestacks on the property. We poked our heads into some holes that looked like they were created after the place had been abandoned, and looked up through the top of the stack. They looked even taller from the inside than they did from the outside. We explored pretty much every building that had an entry point that we could see. A lot of the roofs had collapsed, leaving some buildings inaccessible. Among more graffiti, the factory was now home to various wildlife from the area, some bats and birds being the most mentionable. Other than that, the factory was pretty much dead. Other than a few noises that could be written off as animals or wind, maybe a couple of eye tricks, there wasn't much else. Still enough to be frightening, nonetheless. After exploring for about an hour, I'd gotten my fill of terror for the night. I had plenty of ideas for Bauer's screenplay, and still a sense of eeriness I was sure would last until morning. I looked at Bowers and said, "Well, I think I'm satisfied. Want to head back?" Still sticking with simple, inert answers, he replied, "Yeah." I've worked with Bowers for about 2 years now, as he got hired after I did. After knowing him for that long, his responses were troubling. He usually had a lot more energy and enthusiasm than I did. I've never seen him like this. I didn't expect him to be terrified to the point of paralysis, but he'll normally speculate on some scary stuff that might be happening there with me. We would sit there and scare each other by humouring the other on a noise they thought they heard, but not tonight. If I'm being honest, Bowers was scaring a lot more than the factory was. On the walk back to the truck, I decided to mention some ideas I'd had for his screenplay, to see if I could drag him out of whatever funk he was in. Maybe you could write about this group of teenagers that find this old abandoned factory, and they decide to go on an expedition. Only while they're exploring, people keep disappearing from the group, I suggest. "Yeah, that sounds cool," he replied. "Okay then, more than one word. I'm getting somewhere." Or maybe instead of teenagers, you could have some kind of supernatural or poltergeist investigator, I said, who's going on a trip to this factory because the inhabitants of the town think the factory is haunted. "Yeah, that may work. I kind of like the idea about the teenagers, because I think I'd be a lot more scared of someone in my group disappearing than a ghost," he explained. "Alright, this sounds more like him. Now I'm getting the old Bowers back." We made it down to my truck, still discussing other ideas about the screenplay. As we were getting into the truck, Bowers said, "Hey, wait. Look, there's a tunnel over there that we didn't check out yet." I turned around, and under the line of silos, there was a tunnel leading straight underneath them. "Yeah, okay," I said. "Let's go check him out." I closed my truck door, and we made our way over to the silos. As we peered into the tunnel, it was pitch black. I could barely see moonlight on the other side. Still, I needed my flashlight to be able to navigate through it. The tunnel was probably around 7 feet tall. I could stand up straight in it, but because of some pipes that were occasionally protruding from the walls or ceiling, I'd have to duck every now and then. While we walked down the tunnel, the sounds of our shoes and breathing were amplified. It felt like I was walking through a horror movie. The sound was so enhanced, it almost sounded fake, fabricated. Bowers was walking in front of me, so I was using my light to focus on the ground in front of us. He was aimed down at the end of the tunnel. I could see the end of the tunnel. It appeared to lead to a small concrete room with the ceiling partially collapsed. We were about a third of the way through the tunnel, and still had maybe 150 feet to go. Out of nowhere, Bowers stops walking. I almost ran into him because my view was focused on the ground. I asked him, "You good, man?" He replied, "I'm not sure." "Okay, what the fuck does that mean?" "I don't know," he whispered. "Dude, you're freaking me out. What's the matter with you?" He said nothing, just standing there in silence. I was getting worried, and if I'm honest, terribly paranoid. I started shining the flashlight back behind us, half expecting to see some creepy humanoid figure quickly crawling to catch up with us. But the tunnel was empty, with Bowers and I as its only inhabitants. Suddenly, I hear a scratchy rustling noise. I quickly turn around and see Bowers in a dead sprint, heading towards the end of the tunnel. I was confused, frightened, and frozen. I watched as my friend ran toward the uncertain end of this dark, damp tunnel, with only his flashlight as a beacon informing me of his distance. Part of me wanted to follow him, but I had no idea what to do at this point. In my head, I'm thinking, he's lost his fucking mind. I'm now stuck with him all alone in this tunnel. His light came to a halt in the little concrete room at the end of the tunnel. I could barely make out the outline of his body. He stood there, with his flashlight pointing at the ground. I shined my flashlight down the tunnel at him, and could see he was facing away from me, looking at the wall. I called out, "Bowers, what the hell are..." Before I could finish, Bowers screamed as if he'd just been met with the worst fear. I can't imagine what he'd seen, but it must have terrified him to his very core. He dropped his flashlight and started running back down the tunnel toward me. I put my hand on my pistol, ready to take aim at whatever comes behind him. As Bowers gets closer, I begin to see more of his face. He doesn't look terrified anymore, but happy. Elated almost. I loosen my grip on my gun, thinking he was screwing with me. As he gets closer, his face goes from cheerful to angry. I could barely utter, "What's going..." Bowers runs past me and knocks me on my ass. I hadn't felt a hit like that since high school football. As soon as I got my bearings, I fell across the rocky ground for my flashlight. The moment I grabbed hold of it, I stood up and ran to follow Bowers back out of the beginning of the tunnel. I rushed out of the tunnel, back out into the open air. I pointed my flashlight and caught a glimpse of Bowers running up the hill, back toward the main part of the factory. I stood in front of my truck, gazing up at this factory, just wondering what possessed my friend to do this. My gut was screaming at me to get in my truck, lock the doors, and wait for Bowers to come back down the hill laughing, telling me it was a joke and that he just wanted to freak me out. Well, if that was the case, it was definitely working. I waited for a second to see if I could hear anything. His footsteps had ceased, and the only sound that remained was the light breeze in the air. I stood waiting for what felt like an hour. Out of the darkness, I hear Bowers call out, "Hey bro, come check this out." "Fuck you, I want to go home," I said back. I waited for a reply, but didn't get one. All I wanted was to be back in my truck, cruising down the highway, headed back home. This was a little more of an adventure than I'd bargained for. "Bowers," I shouted back. "Hey bro, come check this out," was his reply. Oh, for fuck's sake. I have no idea what's going on, but I'm genuinely scared. I don't know what else to do except go find him. I pull my pistol out of its holster and hold it, if for nothing else than to make myself feel a little safer in this whole situation. I start to make my way up the hill and gaze again upon the factory. I shined my flashlight all around, searching for my friend. I called out his name again. "Bowers! Hey bro, come check this out." A feeling of dread began to pulse through me. "Well, you have to tell me where you are first," I said. Silence again. I couldn't accurately gauge where he was talking to me from, but he sounded far still. I continued walking toward the factory, going pretty much the same route that we had earlier. I was starting to panic. I didn't know where to look, what to listen for, or what to do. I walked past the giant smokestacks and toward the main grouping of buildings. I checked through every door I passed, looking for any sign of movement. I announced, Listen, Bowers, I'm really freaked out right now, man. I have my gun cocked and ready, so if you're planning on jumping out to scare me, that would be a really bad idea. No reply. Bowers, I yelled. From over to my left, I hear him. Hey, bro, come check this out. I turned to face him. Bowers was standing through a doorway toward the back of one of the rooms. The look on his face will be forever burned into my brain. He didn't look scared or happy or angry anymore. He looked sad. Sad like he had just received the worst news in his life. And someone came and gave him even worse news. No tears or anything, just a frown with the most miserable eyes I've ever seen. I said, "What the hell happened to you back there, man?" He didn't move. His expression didn't change. He just stood there frozen, almost catatonic. I took a step forward. Look! I only got one syllable out before Bowers' face shifted from sadness to laughter. He was laughing in a very over-exaggerated manner, kind of a mocking laughter. The laugh wasn't the most disturbing event of this moment. It was how he had contorted his face into a horrific smile. I don't just mean a really big smile, but like an unnaturally wide grin, literally ear to ear. He began to lift his gun. "Bowers, no!" I screamed. He pointed his gun at me, and I took aim at him. He bent his arm and aimed at his head. "Hey bro, check this out." And he pulled the trigger. The sound of the gun firing echoed off the walls of the factory and bounced off of the surrounding mountains, going back and forth like a metronome. Bowers' body stiffened, then collapsed onto the ground. Blood poured from his head, gushing out of his nose and mouth. There was so much blood I could hear the sound it made as it leaked out onto the concrete floor. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could. I screamed for someone to come help. But then my screams turned to panicked cries. The kind of cries where you can't catch your breath. I've never had a panic attack, but that's the only way I can describe it. I turned and scrambled for my truck. I ran over the edge of the hill and jumped out into the road. Without stopping, I regained my balance and scurried across the street to my truck. I jumped into my truck, started the engine, and got out of there as fast as I could. I sped down the highway, trying to get out of the mountains in range of the cell phone towers so I could call 911. I held my phone in my hand, waiting for even one bar of service to pop up. As soon as I saw the first bar with the little 4G next to it, I opened the keypad and started to dial. I dialed 911 and pushed call. It rang a couple of times, but then the call dropped. "God damn it, come on!" I shouted to myself. Before I could dial again, my phone started to ring. It was my fiancée. I rejected the call so I could first call the police. I'll just call her back in a little while. I started to dial 911, but my phone started to ring again. And again, it's my fiancée. I answered the phone. "Hello? Hey, babe, you gonna be home soon?" she asked. I replied, panicked. "You're not gonna fucking believe this. I don't know what to do. Bowers and I got to the factory, but he started to act weird, and then he killed himself. I'm so scared. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I've got to call the police and get help." She said nothing. I assumed she was as in shock as I was. "Babe, can you hear me? Did you hear what I said?" I asked. After several seconds of silence, I got a reply. Not in my fiancé's voice, but in a still, very familiar voice. The voice said, "Hey bro, come check this out." So this happened a few years ago, but I still remember it like it happened yesterday. Little bit of backstory quickly. My mom's father passed away from a car wreck when she was only 13. I never met the guy, obviously, but I've looked him up through stories and pictures and heard he was a great person. So anyway, that particular morning, my mother went to visit his grave by herself, while I was at my grandmother's house. My mom was going through some emotional situations at the time, and she told me that she prayed to him, asking for him to show her a sign that he's still around. So fast forward to that night. Mum and I were riding to Shongaloo, LA. If you've ever been to Louisiana, then you know it's just a bunch of small towns with a lot of forests and back roads in between, basically. So it's about 11:30ish, I would say. And the road we were on didn't have any light poles or any type of sort of light, besides the car headlights. We were just talking to each other, and all of a sudden, it's like time slowed down. Sound wasn't existent, and we see this humongous, glowing, bright blue ball of light just appear out of thin air, starting from the passenger side of the road. Like it was so bright that you would have seen it come out of the woods, but it didn't. Just appeared on one side of the road and slowly floated across and then disappeared as soon as it got to the other side. Just puff, gone in an instant. And I looked over at my mother, and by this time, everything has gone back to normal. Sound was back. And I still have the sheer, horrified look on her face burned into my brain. It was unexplainable. I've never seen anything like this in my life, but we've both come to the conclusion that it was my grandfather's spirit saying hi to us. One day when I was about 8 years old, my mother was given the worst news of her life. She was told by the doctor that she had 3 types of cancer and they would kill her. Well, she ended up passing in August. After about 2 weeks of living without a mom, I kept getting these weird dreams of going to the park with her. I kept telling my younger self to stop picturing her. She's gone. I guess that was my way of handling grief. Well, when I turned 9 in April, I woke up but couldn't move. I saw my mom in the corner of the room on what sounded like she was whispering something. I kept trying to snap out of it, but I couldn't move. Couldn't get up to say hi and I miss you. Well, she turned around, and what I saw was not my mother. I shortly after learned it was sleep paralysis. Needless to say, I was scared shitless. Finally grew up and realised I was just dreaming, kinda. Years and years went by, until yesterday. I found a picture of my mom and kept looking for more pictures. I kept looking at them, seeing how happy my mom used to be, until I felt a shiver go down my spine and looked through the pictures again. Her face kept changing and getting more and more altered. Her eyes became more and more dark. Her skin became more and more pale white, and her hair was balding. Well, finally, I put the pictures away. We went downstairs and saw the picture of her on the fridge and screamed. My dad came running in and noticed that I was looking at my mom. My dad claims nothing was wrong with the picture. So why was I the only one seeing these things happen? So I'm now almost 21 years old. My mom died when I was 8, and I had creepy dreams about her. I'm really scared. 2 years ago, I moved out from living with my dad. Moved cities, moved house, and now live alone in a 1-story house. Well, one day, I came home from college trying to relax and play some Rocket League on my PS4. Well, I kept hearing like a woman scream my name outside. I finally got up to look, and no one was there. Later that night, I was still awake gaming with some friends when I thought I heard someone jiggling the door handle, and I grabbed my pocket knife, not knowing what could happen, and peered across the living room, staring at my door, and I thought I could see a figure staring at my door, but I wasn't sure and wasn't going to find out. I quickly called my girlfriend, but she was asleep. It was 3:33 a.m, so no answer. I didn't sleep that night. Fast forward 2 weeks, and it's the present day. I heard 5 helicopters fly over my house, and 2 cop cars drove by, saying, "Stay inside. Don't open your door for anyone." So me being a dumbass, opened my door, went over to my neighbour's house to ask what was happening. Well, I knocked, and their door was cracked, so it slowly opened. I noticed their house was a mess, and looked like they just grabbed what they could and disappeared into thin air. They had 3 dogs, 2 kids. Where did they go? This figure kept trying to get into my house, and I finally opened the door and nothing was there. Am I being haunted? Or targeted? To provide some background to this story, I used to work at a Victorian mansion in my hometown during my senior year of high school, up until I left for my first year of university. I was a tour guide there, and because of this, I was kind of allowed to just explore the home during my free time between tours. This mansion, which was known for its eccentric owner and is apparently haunted, according to local urban legend, is big. Big isn't really the right word to describe it, as the home is huge. Its layout is confusing, which lends itself to the overall creepy vibe that the house just gives off. The house is allegedly haunted by its owner, and I'm happy to confirm or deny which house it is if people would like that sort of thing, as it is a well-known tourist location where I'm from. There's a certain time of the year running from June to mid-July where the house is generally more active. It's generally accepted by tour guides, as we were the ones spending the most time in the house out of all the employees, that there are far more sightings and paranormal experiences that would occur during this time of year. Our running theory is that these weeks were the time in which the owner's daughter had been alive, before dying 6 weeks after birth. This death was what really started the owner's spiral into what many would consider to be hysteria or craziness. This happened in late June 2018, if I remember correctly. It had been a slow day, especially slow for the summer months where waves of tourists would come to tour the home. During slower times, tour guides are sent into the home to clean, generally dusting, washing windows, or sweeping. Simple tasks that would help maintain the house. I, along with one of my co-workers, were cleaning in the owner's main bedroom. Us tour guides would refer to this room as the dead room, as this was, in fact, the room that the owner died in. This wasn't something we would use around guests, as that would probably freak out the ones that were not fans of paranormal activity. At this time, my co-worker was fairly new to the job, and seeing that I was one of the more senior tour guides with a year under my belt, I was pointing out things in the room to her. One thing in particular that I pointed out was a scent sachet that was placed in a period picture on the bedside table. It was supposed to have a floral scent of some kind, but was not particularly strong, so guests most likely would not be able to notice any difference it could possibly make. After doing so, I decided to actually do my job and clean. I was dusting the window frames and my co-worker was inspecting the chest of drawers. For reference, this is across the room from where I pointed out the scent sachet to her just minutes before. While she was seeing if the various drawers in this antique piece of furniture would open, she noted that the scent sachet would possibly be more effective on this side of the room, as this was the side of the room where guests would enter on the tour route. There were 4 drawers on each side of this chest and drawers, and she finally got to the bottom one. At this time, we were about 3 or 4 feet apart, our backs to each other. My co-worker said in passing, "I'm sorry, ma'am," to the home's deceased owner, and there was a possibility that this piece was original to the house. As she stood up, there, all of a sudden, there was a strong rose scent, as if someone was shoving a bouquet right in your face, coming from right between where we were standing. I remember feeling this wave of panic immediately wash over me as I turned to look at my co-worker. I asked her if she smelled it too. She said yes, and that she was certain we weren't alone anymore. After a long second of us just looking at each other, the 2 of us bolted from the room, incredibly spooked by this very in-your-face moment. I found no way to explain it since, and the smell of roses never fails to cause a shiver to run down my spine. So I was about 13 years old and living in an old apartment with my mom and my siblings. We've lived there for about 2 or 3 years, and nothing weird has ever happened to us. One night, like any other, I was sleeping, and to be honest, I don't know what time it was. Suddenly, I felt the urge to wake up because I was feeling like someone was pushing on my chest. I don't know if I woke up or not, and I don't know if it was a dream or what, but I felt physical reactions to what happened. I opened my eyes, I think, and I didn't see anything on top of me, but I was feeling a massive pressure on my chest, as if someone was pushing down on it with their hands. I looked to the wall on my right and saw a shadow that I have a hard time describing. It was some sort of big head with horns that were hovering over me. Of course, my first thought that it was the devil or some demon. I was laying on my bed and I tried getting up, but I couldn't even move. I was facing upwards and my arms were straight alongside the rest of my body. I grew up in a Christian family and I was taught to say, "I rebuke you in the name of the Lord," whenever I had to face some sort of weird situation dealing with paranormal stuff. So I tried to say that, but I couldn't. I was trying really hard to say it, but I could barely move my lips and couldn't say more than "I." At the same time, I was forcing my body, as if I was trying to not let that thing inside me. That went on for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, until I felt really tired and stopped forcing my chest. In that exact moment, I felt like an inner heat inside my body, as if that thing got inside me. Plus, the shadow was gone. Then I really woke up, and I felt a pain in my chest and shivers. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and the next morning, I got out of the room and didn't go back in it for the day. And I even think I slept in my mother's room the next night. There should have been 21 assignments for me to grade, and yet I was looking at 22. It didn't make any sense. I double and triple checked the piles of papers, but there was no mistake. I only had 21 students, and yet there were 22 pages to grade. I was hunched over my desk, going through the pages one by one. I took note of all the names, trying to find the extra assignment. They were all simple essays where they described what they'd done during winter break and what they were most looking forward to in the coming year, a simple English assignment. In the middle of the pile, there was one paper that clearly stood out. It was barely legible, and there was no signature. The text was written in squiggly lines with a red pen, pressed so hard into the paper that it had punched several holes. "I'll be free," the paper said. "I got out. She has no idea there's two of us now." The paper was barely legible. Half-finished sentences described a sudden awakening, thoughts of breaking things, describing people as disposable objects, hearing a voice in the mirror. My friend gave me a flower, and now I'm here. There was a scribbled drawing of a blue sunflower in the corner of the paper. It was the strangest thing I'd ever read. Yes, I'm a teacher. The kids I teach are on the edge of turning into teenagers. It's an awkward age, but it's that space in a young person's life where you can really make an impact. If you can make them feel seen and heard, they might gain a confidence that will follow them for the rest of their lives. I have 21 students in my class, 8 boys and 13 girls. The day after I graded that paper, I didn't know what to think or say. After I took attendance, it dawned on me. Whoever handed in that paper was in the room, right now. It threw me off my tempo. I had them do some individual assignments while I found my bearings. It was the usual ruckus, bickering and joking, awkward teenage flirting, loud discussions about whatever was new online. But something felt different, malevolent. It had to be one of the girls. The paper had hinted at it, but which one? I handed out an extra assignment, nothing fancy. I just took the crazy paper out of the bunch and distributed the rest randomly to the students. For tomorrow, they were to write a short essay, telling me about what they'd read in other students' essays. Reading comprehension and writing at once. No one would have a problem with that, except the students. As I got back home with some takeout sushi, I looked over the strange paper again. There were some smudges going left to right. No matter if you're right-handed or left-handed, that'll happen. But further down, there were more smudges. It looked like the writer had held the pen like a hook, with the pen facing the writer. It indicated a left-handed writer. I double-checked with a few articles online, which said the same thing. But there were no hook-handed writers in my class. I would have noticed, but I was sure there were a few left-handed people. I finished my sushi and went to bed with a chilling feeling that I was missing something obvious. The next day, I got the assignments, all 21 of them, no extras. I breathed a sigh of relief, figuring that maybe someone had just played a cruel prank on me. We got through the classes on the day without a hitch. We even managed a fairly successful math quiz. All in all, I wasn't complaining. The extra assignment wasn't that important, but I took them home to grade them anyway. Some had put some effort into the work, and I wanted to reward them. No matter the age, everyone loves gold star stickers, and I had plenty on my crafts table. I started going through the papers, only to notice something. There were, once again, 22 of them. At some point during the day, someone had snuck an extra paper in there. Going through the pages, I couldn't help but feel that bubbling sense of dread. One of these papers was going to be terrifying. It felt like getting slowly pricked by a needle. At first there's just pressure, but you know the hurt is coming. It was at the bottom of the pile. Red ink, barely legible. Spots from a hook-handed writer. "I know you've caught on," the paper said. "I want you to know. I want you to chase." There were little sketches of drops of blood falling into an open mouth. Crude but clear. "Chase me. I'll chase you." I didn't sleep well that night. I pulled the curtains, I double-checked all the locks, I pulled the covers up tight, and I left the light on in the hallway. And yet, I still had that awful sinking feeling that I was missing something. Was it Claire? She'd always been a bit of an oddball, or maybe someone I'd never expect, like Shanda, maybe Petra, Fiona? I had this mental image of someone following me to my car, a young girl hiding in the back seat, a maniacal smile popping up in the rearview mirror, sharp little nails and unblinking eyes diving towards me, cutting my throat open as I'm going 70 miles an hour down the freeway. I didn't sleep well that night. I started imagining shadows passing by in the hall in the corner of my eye. A few days passed. I started taking notes on the girls in class. I checked what pens they had and which was their main hand. If it was just a matter of someone pranking me, it might be enough to just find a left-handed girl. However, no girl in my class was left-handed, and no one owned a red ink pen. I also had a chat with the school counsellor. They couldn't betray patient confidentiality, but they could tell me whether they were aware of any problems that might explain this. They weren't. If anything, they seemed more worried about me. Since this started, I'd seemed a bit on edge. They didn't blame me, but they wanted to make sure I was taking care of myself. I tried several tricks. I tried monitoring the hand ends. I tried watermarking the papers. I tried all kinds of tricks, but I got nothing. At the end of the day, I kept getting outsmarted. It was as if the paper just appeared out of nowhere, sometime during the day. I couldn't pin it on anyone. I tried to just forget about it, but every time I graded a paper, I feared that another threat would show up. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But the times it did, it just ruined me. That peaceful moment of grading papers and listening to audiobooks had turned into a horrific sideshow. "I'll show you," one of the notes said. "I'll break a light in your house." The same day, the kitchen light stopped working. It didn't look broken, but how could I possibly tell? One of those days, as I was chopping leeks in the kitchen, I got this awful sinking feeling in my stomach. Looking out the window, I noticed something. A silhouette, just a few feet away. She was short, with long black hair. There was something wrong with the shape of her face. Her skin looked grey. For a moment, we just stared at one another. It took me a few seconds to realise that it wasn't just a face. It was a skull. Still clutching my kitchen knife, I stumbled away from the window. It had to be a mask. That wasn't a real face. It couldn't be. Suddenly, the lights broke. All of them. The kitchen, the hallway, the bathroom. Hell, even my desktop lamp at my home office. All of them shattered, spreading searing hot shards across the floor with a violent bang. My ears rang, and I dove for cover. It felt like a gunshot. Looking up, there was no one left outside. No mask, no kid, no nothing. I called the police, but there was little they could do. There had been a power surge. That much the electric company could confirm, but there were no witnesses of an intruder. I showed them the notes and filed a threat report. We had a long talk, and they tried their best to calm me down, but at the end of the day, I was still alone, and someone was out there. I went through that image in my head 1,000 times. I had several girls in my class, but no one that fit what I'd seen. Her hair was too long. She was too short, too skinny. I couldn't think of anyone that fit that description. But she'd been there, no doubt in my mind. And I had this gnawing feeling that I'd seen her before. Over the next couple of days, I couldn't stop seeing her. She'd be across the road as I went to work in the morning. I'd see her pass by the window in the cafeteria, and one day, as I was driving home, I saw her in the rear view mirror of my car. That grey death's head grinning at me. I was getting more notes, not just slipped into the hand in assignments, but also just scattered around my apartment. At one point, I snapped. I'd just stepped out of the shower. I'd put on a bathrobe and had started to dry my hair when I noticed a message on the bathroom mirror. There, written backwards, it simply said, "Chase me." I screamed as my heart sank. I broke the bathroom mirror with my hairdryer. "What the fuck do you want from me?" I called out. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I barely noticed the glass shards cutting into my feet as I stormed out. I'd had enough. I had to do something. I couldn't live like this forever. Kid or not, this had to end. "Where are you?" I called out as I passed through my bedroom. "Where the fuck are you?" I glimpsed something outside the window. Of course she was around. Always there, always near. "Come out!" I screamed as I entered the kitchen. "Show yourself!" The moment I stepped into the kitchen, it shook. Every drawer, every door, every appliance. Everything flung open, as if pulled open by a steady hand. I was so frustrated I could cry. I just wanted it to end, but I was too scared to move. It felt like anything could happen at any moment, like the entire world was listening to me and reacting accordingly. I just stood there, trying to remember to breathe. "Please," I whispered, "show yourself. Stop this." And as if to answer my call, she did. The front door creaked. The hinges rusted and fell apart. A gentle breeze was all it took for the door to break. She was so small. There was no doubt in my mind. She wasn't wearing a mask. She was nothing but bone. I backed away, like an animal pushed into a corner. I tried to force myself to attack, to do something. But as a response, the kitchen shook again. This time, it was pandemonium. Cutlery cashed onto the floor. Plates rolled out of the dishwasher and broke apart. Glasses shot across the room like bullets. Even the little drawer of miscellanea collapsed in on itself, spreading knickknacks and rubber bands all over the room. "I've chased you!" I screamed. "Are we fucking done? Is this it?" She raised a thin, grey finger. She pointed at something in the corner. A dry, blue sunflower. Something clicked in my head. That sense of missing something. It was still there, but this was the answer. Somehow, this was it. "What do you mean?" "What? Just talk. Don't just..." There it was. The first note. There'd been a drawing of a blue sunflower, and it said she'd gotten it as a present. This was that flower. I was sure of it. I got out. She has no idea there's two of us now. That's what it had said. That was part of that very first note. She was talking about me. I'd written those notes myself. I handed in the assignments. That's how I never noticed it. I looked over at my crafts table. My red ink pen was half empty by now. I had red smudges under my left hand. And then there was her. Of course I'd seen her before, time and time again. I had long black hair as a kid. I'd been skinny and short. You found me, her little voice said. Funny. The images came flooding back. A shadow in the bathroom mirror. A simple hello and a flower offered. I remember taking the hand of an impossible being, reaching across a nightmare space to darken my inner child. This awful, malevolent being living at the core of my soul. Something dead and resurrected, trying to make room for madness. But it wasn't just madness. She was real. Doors don't rust by themselves. Glasses don't throw themselves. And I can't for the life of me cause an electric surge with my mind. This was a real being with real power, and she'd settled in the back of my mind. And now I've chased her. I'd found her. Do you want me to leave? She asked. I can. I didn't know what to say. Of course I wanted her gone. I wanted it all to be over. But there was this gnawing feeling that there was more to it. She didn't just scare me and torture me for the fun of it. Tell me to leave, she insisted. Set me free. That was it, wasn't it? She wasn't free. She came from me, and so maybe she was stuck with me. Maybe she couldn't leave. Maybe she couldn't hurt anyone else. Not as long as I'm around. It said, I'll be free in that first note. That meant she wasn't free as of now. To me, it suddenly made sense. Standing there, I shook my head. You can't leave, can you? I cackled. You're just as stuck with me as I am with you. I could kill you, she laughed. No, you can't, can you? If so, why haven't you? There was no response. You need to be cut you loose to get you out there, don't you? That I find you and just let go. I took a step forward and saw blood seeping out from the sole of my feet. My hands were rattling like leaves in the wind. I'm not letting go, I screamed. No fucking way. I'll hurt you. Do your fucking worst. But there was nothing more. In the blink of an eye, she was gone. But in my mind's eye, I could still see her. Every memory of seeing myself as a kid was tainted. I had memories of seeing myself in the mirror with a skeleton-faced grin. I remember seeing my reflection in water puddles. I knew that wasn't what I'd looked like, but in my head, that was me. We were interchangeable. She was me, and I was her. Two beings, and I was going to keep her here. I'll be a walking fucking jail. I know it sounds absurd, but she is real, and nothing I can do changes that. I couldn't live with that thing coming out of me, reaching other people, spreading. I can't work at the school anymore. She scares the children. I'm afraid of seeing other people. She hurts them whenever she gets the chance. I've seen birds fall out of the sky. A family of moles lying dead at my doorstep. Circles of roadkill lined up around my car. I've been thrown, cut, burned and beaten, but I haven't succumbed. She's just as scared of me as I am of her. I had to write this down. If you're reading this, something has happened. Maybe an accident. Maybe I've grown sick. I've set up for this to be posted as my post-mortem, as an explanation for my eccentric behaviour. It's on a 7-day timer, so if I haven't confirmed my status by that time, it's safe to say I'm not around anymore. And if I died, I pray to God I took her with me. I don't want to think about what that thing could do if it's set free. Unbound. A couple of years ago, I frequently saw some visions after I woke up from my sleep in the middle of the night. And those visions lasted no more than a second, but I always felt like they were long and vivid. I don't know how else to tell this, but it felt like time was bent, and a time that was short feels a bit longer. I knew these visions were short, but it felt a little bit longer. This has been happening since I was a little boy. The earliest I recall is having a huge ass white, I mean all white spider on my bed, crawling up on me. There are some examples in the middle now, but I don't want to go into unnecessary details that much. There's just one guy who I've seen more than once. He's a guy with the look of a thief or burglar. Once when I was a child, I saw him in my dream. He had white skin, a well-shaven face or his beard didn't grow. He wears all black with a cap and leather gloves and so on. Again, when I was a child, I had a dream in which I was lying on the couch in my living room, and my mother and father were praying, indifferent of me, and I'm chilling until this guy comes in and looks at me, and starts making his way towards me, hands stretched like a mummy. He closes in, his face inches away from mine that I can see his iris clearly. I wake up and see a glimpse of him and wet myself crying. Last summer when I was sleeping, I suddenly woke up without a reason, and when I opened my eyes, it was this mofo again, standing and watching me with a hand lamp. I was fully awake, and although the light burned and hurt my eyes, I could see his grinning face. It was him. Although I was frightened, I suddenly had anger towards the guy, and these emotional changes happened in like 2 seconds. I was mad and pissed at the guy because my eyes were hurting from all that light buried in my face. I yell at the top of my lungs like, "I've had enough of you," while bolting out of the bed to punch him. If it was a solid body, that would have been a perfect punch. But as soon as I did that, he pixelated. Thousands, millions, billions of pixels like gold dust flying up in the air. And I've never seen that guy after I punched him into oblivion. What was that? My family believes in ghosts. We have a lot of stories, especially from the current house they live in. We also prefer to deal with things in a flippant way. I mean, we bless the house, how many times? And something always comes back and starts drama. My mom believes that entities attach themselves to me and I end up taking them home, but that's a story for another time. When my sister was in her younger teens, she really liked Kurt Cobain and had a poster of him on her wall. My mom was kind of grossed out about it, saying his negative energy from him committing suicide could affect my sister. At some point during her occasional lectures, in an effort to spook my sister, she said, "Kurt Cobain climbs out of that poster and makes you have bad dreams." And that started it. The ghost we would hear in that specific part of the house was now Kurt Cobain, and involving friends and relatives until the lore was a fun experience. Kurt Cobain walks around upstairs. This room was a converted attic on a one-level house. So if Kurt Cobain was awake, anyone on the first level would hear. People tend to feel uncomfortable in that room, aside from my sister and myself, who shared the room with her, when I was around during college break. My boyfriend, who never really believed in ghosts, had his first experience while staying over there, and we now call it the Kurt Cobain confrontation of 2015. My family had left the day before for vacation, and my boyfriend and I were going to follow them up early the next day. So we spent the night at the house because we were going to grab a few extra things in the morning. As we went to the bed, the light we turned off flicked back on. Then we heard Kurt Cobain stomping around upstairs and opening drawers. In the morning, when we were grabbing what we needed to, we saw that my sister's bed was completely moved to one side. This extends to others staying over, like my sister's friend staying over during a party, hearing 3 loud knocks just recently. And if you're wondering, yes. If you were in the same room while Kurt Cobain was walking around, you would definitely hear him, though it usually sounded like shuffling. To avoid being scared shitless and unable to sleep, I would plug my earbuds in and listen to some basic white noise or rain, etc., and tell him to leave me alone. In regards to that room, once I was staying there while I was in town and my sister was out of town. It was about 11:30 p.m, so everyone was in their respective rooms. I'm watching a YouTube video on my phone when I hear a boom. It sounded like a bowling ball was dropped in the closet. I'm absolutely shocked, and I'm trying to investigate the sound when my other sister comes in to check on me. She said it sounded like I fell off my bed. Then my parents, who were staying in the renovated basement, came up to scream at us over the ridiculous amount of noise we're making. This asshole Kurt Cobain did something so stupid loud, my parents in the basement woke up. We could never figure out what the fuck the noise was. Nothing was broken or fallen over. So that's the story of how my family handles scary stuff. It's fun to say, oh, that's just Kurt Cobain, when someone's staying over hears something weird from upstairs. So this is a story from when I was just a kid. I believe around 8 or 9 years old at the time of my first encounter. I had a weird dream with a woman in a white dress with flowers on it, kind of like an old nightgown, but with more layers of cloth. She didn't look scary or evil or anything, just like a normal person. The thing is, when I woke up in my loft bed and looked out of the little window over my bedroom door, she was standing in the hall looking right back at me. It freaked me out so much I just yelled out for my parents and hid under my bed. My parents didn't believe me and said it was just a bad dream. Well, as a kid, you believe your parents have all the answers, and so you just listen to what they say. Go back to bed and forget about it. Problem is, this was not the last time I would see her. Every now and then I saw her, sometimes in a dream, sometimes in real life. Sometimes clear, other times just a glimpse or in the corner of my eye. Sometimes at night, other times in the middle of the day. Eventually, I was in the last year of what can be described as elementary school. Here in the Netherlands, we only have 2 schools before you start to study for a specific job or field. So I was 11 years old, and as a tradition, your class goes on a week-long trip, the last year of school. During this trip, we were sharing ghost stories in the boys' room of an old farm that had been converted to a sort of hotel. There were already rumours that the place was haunted, supported by the fact that many of the photos taken inside had weird white rings on them for some unknown reason. But that's not really important here. The important part is some of the kids got really scared. One said the ground was spinning and tilting, and a few others started seeing and feeling stuff no one else could. And eventually, the panic woke up the teachers and girls in the other rooms, who all went into the hall to have a look at what was going on. So far, everything was fine for me, but when I looked into the hall where all the girls were standing, I saw her, clear as day, standing between the rest of the girls. No one even seemed to notice the grown woman, but I yelled out in fear to get away from me and leave me alone. Something I now regret, because I'm still not sure if it was even real, or all just the overactive imagination of a child's mind. Probably unrelated, but might possibly be relevant, is something my mother told me years later. When I was a little kid, like 3 or 4 years old, I used to talk to a princess. Not playing or pretending like with an imaginary friend, but full-on conversations just sitting there. I don't remember any of that, but I thought it was interesting and makes up some of my theories on the nature of this ghost woman thing. I've not seen her since, but the memories are still some of the clearest I have as a child, and I've spent many hours trying to find out if it was even real. And if it was, what was she? This story happened around 1 or 2 weeks ago, and is the first time in my life where I encountered or thought I encountered a ghost. My friends and I were having a sleepover at my house. There were about 7 of us. We wanted something exciting to do, so we were thinking of stuff we could do. And we remembered that there was this abandoned munitions factory not too far away from us. Some people in our grades started to go, but most of my friends have not gone, so we decided to go. When we got there, I had this horrible gut feeling that something horrible was going to happen. Mind you, I've been there before, and when I was there, did not get this horrible gut feeling. I told my friends I was just going to stay by the car, but they begged me so, even though I had a horrible gut feeling. I went into the dark, lifeless trail to get to the destination with my friends. We finally arrived at the munitions factory, and like before, it was creepy. But unlike last time, this anxiety only grew. The factory was crazy. I mean, upside down crosses were a common sight, same as 666 messages, and occasionally you'd see satanic hypergraphs in the building. Also, my friend said that he saw candles in the building as well, but I cannot personally confirm that one. So we explored the main building and eventually went into the outside tunnels of the factory, which if you look at Google Maps, you'll know what I'm talking about. This is where the possible ghost or demon encounter happened. Mind you, before this happened, my friend, let's just call him Connor, was calling out a possible ghost by saying over and over again the phrase, "show your presence." We were all in the tunnel when my friend, let's just call him Thomas, was 100 feet behind us in the dark, trying to scare us. But instead of scaring us, we saw him sprinting at us, telling us that he heard knocking. At first, we didn't believe him, because the whole time he was trying to scare us in many different ways, but he kept begging us, he wasn't kidding. We all then decided to stay silent to see if we could hear anything, and sure enough, we heard a loud knock knock. That's when we bolted out of the tunnel. We were all one group, and we were running towards the forest to escape when we heard Connor scream, which made us think he was being chased, which made us run faster into the forest. In all reality, Connor just did that to be funny, which I don't know why you would do that in a situation that all of us felt could be life or death, which made all of my friends suspicious that he knocked, but I'll talk about that later. Apparently, Connor, Thomas, and my other friends, let's just call him Brendan, all went back through the building to get to the exit. So we were in two groups. I know that splitting up is never a good idea, but blame it on why we split up. At the end after the group, I was travelled through thick thorn bushes, ran into the police, but just got a warning, and eventually hopped an 8 to 10 foot barbed wire fence. And the other group travelled back through the building, eventually saw another group of teenagers and decided to scare them, and hid in the bushes to avoid the cops. We all made it back to the car and went back home. Turns out, my gut feeling was right, as the last time I was there, nobody else was in the building and there were no cops. Mind you, all this happened at around 11 PM, so it was very dark. When we got back to my house, we played some video games, did some other stuff, even played some poker. When it was around 2 or 3 AM though, we started talking about the factory. Here's where the story gets terrifying. The whole time, we were under the impression that someone was just messing with us back there, but then we talked about it. If someone was messing with us, they would have had to travel 100 feet in less than a minute, because that's how short of a time it was from the time Thomas ran to us to the time we heard the second knock. There are two ways they could have travelled, either on the roof or through the trees right outside the tunnel. But with logic, those answers are easily disprovable. If he travelled on the roof, we would have heard him, as the roof of the tunnel was sheet metal. And the first time I was there, my friend was trying to scare us by going on the roof, and whenever he stepped, he made a lot of noise. The second option of going on the outside of the tunnel also doesn't make sense, because we would have heard the tree branches and sticks break, and also the foliage was so thick. I think it might be physically impossible to move 100 feet in less than a minute, but again, you can go on Google Maps and see what I'm saying. Plus, if someone was messing with us, when we started running away, they probably would have screamed pussy at us or something. Also, when we finally got outside, we looked at the tunnel from the outside and saw no one on the roof. So the only thing I can reasonably think of is that it was one of us, but also, we were all in a big group when it happened, so we would have seen if someone did it. Even if Connor was acting suspicious, I think we would have noticed or seen him do it. Also, it sounded as if it came from the roof as well. Also, when we were at my house, Connor put to God it was not him, as did everyone else pretty much.